Hi, I'm Scott Stevens, lead pastor of Northway Christian Community. I'm excited you're here to listen to this message from our teaching team. I'm also excited that you are intentionally seeking to grow in your relationship with Jesus. By watching this message, our hope is your faith will be challenged as you learn more about who God is and how much He loves each and every one of us. However, watching or listening to a message is just one part of spiritual growth. In addition to being challenged by a message, I believe it's so important to be part of a local church community. At a local church, you can develop friendships and insights with other believers and also help to connect with those who are searching for God and not yet following Jesus. So, whether it is Northway or one of the other great churches throughout the Pittsburgh region, or if you're watching from some other part of the world, please consider taking this step toward being part of a local church. And if you do visit Northway, I want you to know that we are a church community that is passionate about learning to love people where we live and work and play. And there is certainly room for you at all of our Pittsburgh locations. Visit our website at northway.org for all the details. Hey folks, enjoy the message, and we hope to see you soon. Well, welcome to Northway on this incredible summer weekend here in the Pittsburgh region, right? A couple things before I dig in and continue our 2 Samuel summer teaching series. Maybe you're not aware of this. At Northway, we run on what we call a fiscal calendar, which means our year sort of begins 1st of July and then it ends on the last day of June. And Emily Cook, who oversees all of our finances here at Northway this week, she pulled together some year-end numbers for me, sent them over to me, and I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to share them with you. So hear this for a moment. Our total giving was up 5.1% year over year, and our total attendance at Northway was up 7.4% year over year, both with record-setting Easter and Christmas Eve attendance. Now, hear me on something. Those are just numbers, right? But what that represents hundreds of thousands of dollars additional that was sent out to our Northway global and local mission partners. That represents money that is set aside for people to receive aspects of our care and our counseling ministry. Those are resources that go directly to our kids and our students and adult ministries. Those are numbers, sure, but they represent about 400 more people this year that were engaged in hearing the gospel than last year. And I just have to tell you, I talk to a lot of local and national pastors that I'm friends with, and they're not telling me those type of numbers from many of their churches. I just want you to hear this. I've said this a couple times up here. God's doing something at Northway. And I really believe it's just like the front edge of it that we are experiencing right now. A few months ago, I received a phone call from Outreach Magazine. And it's a magazine that's really mainly targeted at pastors and church boards and staffs. And I was informed on the phone that we are one of the top 100 fastest growing churches in the country. And they actually asked if it was okay to have Northway listed in an upcoming issue, and then they asked if I'd be willing to do an interview for the magazine. And if you know me, I just don't do that. I just don't do interview type stuff. And I was this close to just saying no, and then I thought, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you send me some of the interview questions, and then I'll get back to you. And they did. And a couple of the questions was this, what have you figured out about today's culture that has led Northway to grow? They asked, one question was, what are 3 things that Northway is doing differently than other churches that is sparking growth? I don't have answers to those questions because it's a God thing. It's not a Northway thing. And it's certainly not a me thing. I just want you to know, I turned down the interview, and I also asked if it was okay with them just to maybe just not even list us in the magazine. I wanted to celebrate it with you and our staff, but frankly, I would just prefer to fly under the radar and continue to allow this to be a God thing. But I do want to say thank you to you. Across all 6 of our locations, you are the church. You are Northway. So thank you for making this such a great church. One of the things I've really enjoyed about this extended summer teaching series is we focused on one book of the Bible. It's allowed us the opportunity to have some different teachers take and own one of the weekend messages. So if you've been with us in this series, Paul Hunter from our East End campus and John Riley from our Dormont campus each owned one of the sermons. By the way, John Riley's sermon last weekend was exceptional. If you were on vacation, it was so good. If you were on vacation last weekend or away, please go back to our website and check this out. Dennis Allen, our Oakland campus pastor, preached to all of Northway for the first time during this series, and his message was so strong. I wanted to encourage you right now not to miss next weekend. Amanda Beggs has been part of the Northway staff since she was a senior in college. And over those 12 years, she has led our kids, our students, adult ministries in the Sewickley Valley campus and in Wexford. Do you know this, that she currently oversees our leadership development area across all Northway, which means she oversees our college intern ministry, our resident ministry, our emerging leader ministries. She often teaches our entire staff when we gather as all 6 campuses on a Wednesday morning in the areas of leadership, and she's also taught some of the live weekends at our Sewickley Valley location. She's going to preach next weekend as we continue this 2 Samuel series. I've already read and heard some of the content from her sermon, and I just want to tell you, you really need to be here. And this is sort of random, and I just feel like I needed to say this. If you're a young woman, or if you're like a parent and you have a daughter, please make sure they are here next week. See, the church, Northway, we need strong women leaders. And I really believe that young women need to see dynamic female leaders up here leading, worshiping, and teaching. So I want to challenge all of Northway across all locations. Here you go, big challenge. I want to make next weekend the highest attended weekend of the summer. Okay? Cancel your vacations if you like. I want us to support Amanda Beggs by making sure that next weekend is our highest attended weekend. She is brilliant and a gifted teacher. So last weekend's message was chapter 11 of 2 Samuel, and I don't know how to describe it outside of that chapter. It's just a difficult, it's a sobering chapter. King David, a man after God's own heart. The first 10 chapters of 2 Samuel, he's just making one incredibly wise, beautiful decision after the next. And then we get to chapter 11, and he breaks 3 of God's 10 commandments. He covets his neighbor's wife. He committed adultery, an illicit relationship with Bathsheba. And he's behind the murder of Bathsheba's husband, Uriah. And when King David is confronted, he fully understands his sin, his mess. He understands what he has done, and I love what he does. He goes directly to God and asks for forgiveness. God, please do not ruin me. God, mercy. God, please, grace. His plea is recorded in Psalm 51. Psalm 51 is David's raw emotions being poured out to God. And actually, I think Psalm 51 should be an encouragement to us all. Because see, for someone here today, you need to hear this. Whatever you've done, it's not too big for God to forgive and to restore you and to redeem you. I'm just going to read a couple sections of David's prayer to God. Listen to David. Learn from David. Maybe there's someone here today that what you really need to do is you need to go to like a dark room and have a conversation like this, like David did with God. And David says, have mercy on me, God. According to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. He goes on to say, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. And then he closes this plea to God by saying, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in with me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. Wow, it's a powerful moment, David going to God. Does anybody remember the time before digital cameras and iPhone cameras, right? Anybody remember that time? But back when you had to take a picture, like with a camera, right? Remember that? You only had so many pictures on there. You'd click and then zit, zit, zit. You have to move it forward, and maybe you had 12 or maybe you had 24 pictures, and when you were done taking whatever the number was, you like ejected the film out of the back of the camera. And then you had to take it to somewhere, like to CVS, and wait a week for the film to be developed into pictures. Like when you took it there was a skilled person there, I guess, like in a dark room that would take the film and he'd dip it into chemicals and develop the pictures. And then he'd give it back to you in an envelope with the negatives. I know all of the folks at our Oakland campus are like, was that what it was like in the old days? Like, right? How many of you remember having to go through that process? See, for some of us here today, like David, maybe we need to take our negatives to a dark room and allow God to develop us. Maybe we need to take our negative actions and our behaviors and our desires and some of the messes that we've created and give God the opportunity to make them all white as snow, to renew maybe a right spirit in your heart. And maybe for you, you need to restore the joy of that relationship with Jesus, that salvation. I want to encourage us all. Man, if you've messed up like King David, take your negatives to the Lord and experience his grace upon grace. That was chapter 11. I'm going to be in chapter 15 today. But what happens between these two chapters? Well, God forgives David. God loved David. God loves you, despite the mess. However, unfortunately, there were still consequences for his actions. At this point in this story, David has so many wives and so many children that his family dysfunction is out of control. In chapter 13, and I do not recommend reading chapter 13 with your 5-year-old before bed. It's not, they don't include that chapter in children's Bibles, because in chapter 13, David's daughter, Tamar, falls victim to a brutal rape at the hands of one of David's sons, Amnon. Amnon is the son of one of David's wives named Ahinoam. And then next thing that happened is Absalom, another one of David's sons, but from a different wife, Ma'akah, kills his stepbrother, Amnon, in retaliation for the sin against Tamar. And in the midst of all this violence and dysfunction, David receives word that Absalom has actually or possibly killed all of his sons. And this mass confusion happens until it can become clarified that Absalom has indeed killed one of David's son, Amnon. Absalom, it says, flees, and for 3 years, frankly, for 3 years, in which a time where David should have went and found him, should have punished him, should have brought some kind of justice for what he did, but he doesn't. He lets him stay away for 3 years. Why? Why doesn't he go and confront him? Because Absalom is his favorite. And everybody knows that. Absalom eventually is permitted to return to Jerusalem. And here's how David punishes him. He doesn't talk to him for 2 years. And then after that 2 years, he publicly forgives him with a kiss in front of all of Jerusalem. And Absalom is invited back into the palace. And that brings us to chapter 15, where we're at today, where we'll spend the rest of our time together today. David probably at this moment is about 60, maybe 65 years old. Absalom at this time is maybe 25, 30 years old at the most. And the family dysfunction is still raging. So in chapter 15, verse 1, after Absalom is invited back into the palace, it says, after this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, hey, from what city are you? And when he would say, well, your servant is from such and such a tribe in Israel, Absalom would say to him, see, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by my father, by the king, to hear you. Then Absalom would say, oh, that I were the judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or a cause might come to me, and I would give him justice. And whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. What's going on here? Absalom is a backstabber. He's a self-ambitious manipulator who clearly has his father deceived. Absalom is an unrepentant, unpunished murderer who places himself at the city gates and throughways as people came to town seeking justice with some kind of a grievance they have. And he'd hear their story and he would say, I can't believe that happened to you. Man, you deserve justice, but you're not going to get any from my father. If only I was king. Day after day, for 4 years, he beat that drum and he fooled everyone without David even having a clue. And in verse 7, it says this, and at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, so he says to his father, please let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I lived in Geshur in Aram, saying, if the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord. And the king, David, he says to him, all right, go in peace. So he rose and he went to Hebron. He's lying to David. He's saying he needs to go to Hebron to fulfill a vow that he made to God years ago. In verse 10, it says this, but Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in their innocence and knew nothing. He basically tricks 200 leaders in coming with him. And he sends word through secret messengers to all the families and the tribal leaders, all those people that he has been charming and deceiving over the last 4 years, that when you hear the sound of the trumpet, I want you and your family and your tribe and your village to stand up and say, Absalom is now our king. And lastly, he goes on and convinces one of David's chief advisors and close sort of counsel to join and side with him. And in verse 12, it closes with this, and the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. You know, there is like a really fine line between ambition and selfish ambition. And Absalom is clearly stomped and stepped over the line. Philippians 2, verse 3, it says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility, count others more significant than yourselves. Folks, ambition, it's a good thing, right? Like I want my daughters to have ambition. Without ambition, we would not have progress. I think we would all just sort of sit back and wait for things to happen. A degree of ambition is like really good. And in the church, I think over the last 30 or 40 years, there has been a lot of incredible teaching on ambition and purpose and destiny. See, and I really believe that the church needed this teaching. I think over the last many years, the church needed to stop maybe just sitting back and waiting for people to show up. The church needed to become proactive and strive for excellence. The church needed change and innovation in order to reach the next generations. Do you know in the New Testament, Paul uses the word or speaks to ambition about 10 times. And in 7 of those times, it's in the context of godly ambition. But in 3 of those times, it's in this context of selfish ambition. See, there's a really strong distinction, a strong line that separates godly ambition from selfish ambition. Paul speaks of godly ambition, and he says things like, I am ambitious about preaching the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. Godly ambition, he says, I am ambitious about advancing the kingdom and the church. See, selfish ambition is not about the kingdom of God or the gospel. Selfish ambition is about advancing ourselves. That's what Absalom is doing in this passage. His ambition was about advancing his own kingdom, not about advancing God's. Let me just ask you a question for you to think over in your mind just for a second. What's your ambition right now? What's your dream? What's your desire? And then can I ask you, is it selfish? Is it about advancing your own kingdom? Or is it about advancing God's kingdom? See, when you are driven by selfish ambition, you will try to make things happen by your own strength. See, I just want to warn you, be careful. If your ambitions are focused solely and selfishly on your own plans and you have not allowed God to enter into them, if you fight with all your strength to get yourself to a place without God, then you're going to have to fight to keep yourself there. See, some of the very places you think or we think we want to ascend to, we think we deserve right now, be careful, because you might not be ready to fight the spiritual battles that you will face there. You know, I've seen selfish ambition over the years get some people to places in their life that they're not ready for. But on the other hand, if yours is godly ambition, meaning if you've walked this over step by step with God, you've talked it through with Him, you've been in that dark room and sort of sorted out your motives and your desire with God. See, if godly ambition raises you to places that He has prepared you for, then no demon from hell or person on earth can stop you. Godly ambition leads to a beautiful destiny and destination. But if you are driven by selfish ambition, you can easily compromise your destiny or those destinations where you want to be. You know, the reason why I said no to the Outreach magazine article was I'm not interested in building Northway's kingdom. I'm interested in advancing God's kingdom here in Pittsburgh, in this city, in this region that I love so much. See, please hear me on this. I'm not saying don't chase your dreams, right? And I know that today's culture tells us to follow our dreams, right? we're flooded with follow your dreams, ignore the haters, right? However, when I watch like the American Idol tryouts on TV, there are some people that cannot sing. There are some people that needed some people in their life to be honest with them that shouldn't be your dream, right? And I just want to say something. This might sound a little harsh, so I'll say it slow. God is not obligated to bless your dream. See, your dream or your ambition might actually be a distraction to what he is calling you to. I've tried not to follow my dreams. Rather, I try to follow Jesus. And when I do that, my dreams tend to follow me. Just something else I'd like us all to just maybe consider. What if your current ambition or your current dream is just the first draft? What do I mean by that? Like 35 or 40 years ago, my ambition and my dream was to be a school teacher in the city school system. That was a good dream, right? But that's what I wanted. That was on my heart. That was my ambition. But see, when I started following Jesus, he led me here. And some of you that know me know this. I had no ambition whatsoever to be the lead pastor of this church. Like, in fact, when it looked like I was actually going to be asked or called to this position, I told God, no, I don't want to do that. And I had to spend some time like in the dark room, like with the negatives of my life. And I told God, like, this is not my desire. This is not my ambition. And through that process, he just clearly said, I'll develop those negatives, Scott. If I place you there, I'll sustain you there. And what was God asking me to do in that moment? He was asking me to surrender, to stop attempting to control his plan. See, I think so many of us, we have our own plan and we want God to bless it. And he is saying, I know what's best. Stop trying to control it. Simply surrender it to me. And in that moment, I surrendered. And he assured me, that he would give me all I needed for a season as lead pastor. And he has been consistently faithful. I love this church. I plan on working here, and having this church be Tina and I's home for the rest of my life. But I am continually focusing on what does God want next for me. I place my ambition completely to him. God, what do you want my next season? With old age, and I turned 58 in a couple weeks, so with old age should come maturity, right? So I'm getting mature, right? Don't laugh so loud at that, whoever that was. See, surrendering control to God has become easier for me as I grow older. It's a beautiful thing. Can I just challenge you, if you're a younger person today, don't wait to get old to surrender your ambitions to God. Be careful chasing your dreams if they are not God's desire for your life. Don't let your ideas become your idols. So what happens next in this text? In verse 13, it says, and a messenger came to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. And when David said to all of his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape from us, from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said to the king, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides. So the king went out and all of his household after him. David is not wanting to bring war to the city that he loves. He does not want to go to battle against the son that he loves. The story actually says, the text reads that he actually instructs the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God, to be left in Jerusalem, and he leaves. And he says this, I'll find favor in the eyes of the Lord. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure with you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me what seems good to him. He's basically saying, I'm letting go of control and I'm surrendering this to God. If I find favor in his eyes, then perhaps he will restore my authority. But if not, if he has a different plan, so be it. David is saying, God's will be done. You know, folks, as we go through this book, David is not a perfect leader, but he is a surrendered leader. You know, I believe the best leaders that are worth following are those that are surrendered to God. Let me just say this. If you're looking for a spouse right now, find one that's surrendered to God. If you're looking for a good friend or a mentor, find one that is surrendered to God. If you're looking for a church, find one that is surrendered to God. If you're looking, maybe you've been blessed and you're looking to give a donation or a gift to a nonprofit or to like a family or something, give it to someone that is surrendered to God. If you're looking for meaning or purpose and direction in your life because it just doesn't feel right now, I'm telling you, surrender your ambitions, your dreams, and your purpose to God. You will never, ever regret it. Absalom, he controls. David surrenders. Who's God going to bless? And that's exactly where Amanda will pick up next week. David surrendered control. He left his ambitions and his dreams in the hands of God. See, I really believe with all my heart that if we are faithful with what God has put into our hands, he will give us what's in our heart. Let me pray. Lord, right now, I just know that across all of our locations, this idea of trying to discern whether our ambition is selfish or whether it's godly, it's challenging, God. Would you help right now bring clarity to all of us? Help us really discern and work it through with you, Lord. Are these dreams, God, are they the path for me? Is that what you're calling me to? Lord, I want to be surrendered to you. We lift these things up in your Son's name. Amen.